are just kind of like, you know, things are changing, but it's not affecting me yet,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Or they have no control.
But the only way that they might see it affecting is with rent, or like,
Right.
they can't afford to live in these new developments. But a lot of them have been still living in the same apartments. Well, if something happens, then that's when they're gonna be up in arms. So, yeah.
And I think a lot of them don't really understand that connection. They just kind of think it's happening, and they don't really understand why, you know? And it's also like, Ironbound is also very strong, you know, one immigrant population and strong service work population. So like service work is like very tiring, it's very, I mean, I even grew up, yes, it's very tiring. I even grew up with that because my mom used to own a deli in Ironbound. So like, when I was 12, I was working for my mom. So, you know what I'm saying? So I understand like how tiring that can be, and that's like a lot to get caught up in.
Sure.
Like you mentioned. So, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So let's take two questions and at once, and then bring them back to the floor. John first, and then
Yes, so, I hope this isn't talk wall. In maybe early 2000s, 2004, 2005, I did interviews with Marcelo Cerqueira, who was then becoming head of Grupo Gay Bahia, and a guy, José Santana, who was running a group for Afro-Brazilian men called Quimpano Dudu in Bahia. And one of the things that I found so interesting in the two interviews, conversations, was on one hand, you know, Marcelo was sort of thinking about the larger work that Grupo Gay Bahia does, not just in Bahia, but across Brazil in terms of organization, activism. And so we were, you know, just asking probably very basic questions about, you know, the pride, et cetera. And one of the, he made the point that, you know, we bring a lot of things from the United States. You know, we see what is happening in the United States, we see what's happening in Europe, and it's, you know, it's almost kind of magical, right? So even a lot of the terms they were using, et cetera. But then he said, you know, but then in other ways, you know, our experience of our pride is very Brazilian, right? And it's rooted for here in Bahia, it's rooted in Bahia, Bahia culture. And so, you know, it's not unusual to have aspects of, you know, Afro-Brazilian culture or Candomblé, et cetera. And then José Santana was much more kind of sharp when it came to saying, look, you know, our traditions go back, you know, centuries, right? You know, this is something that's actually survived, and we work to keep it alive. Okay. So I raised this question and asked, in thinking about the people that you've spoken to, and then just thinking about, for example, right now in Brazil, you know, the last few years, and especially now, I'm thinking, you know, just this incredible, vibrant discourse that's kind of occurring around queerness, around race, around class, and stuff like that, on gender, you know, the ways in which, you know, there was a piece, I can't remember the magazine, but there was a magazine that featured all these young, queer, Afro-Brazilians who were really sort of pushing back against the, especially I think coming from the evangelical church, these certain very kind of fixed ideas about gender. I mean, and it was sort of fascinating, one of the, and conclude, but one of the sort of fascinating things that sort of heralds of all of this was, as you probably know, a few years ago when Judith Butler went to Brazil, and she got to the main airport in Rio, she's getting her bag, she's coming out, and there are all these protesters basically saying, you know, we don't want your gender ideology. And I remember, you know, friends sent it to me, and I circulated people, and they're like, I don't even know who Butler is. But why is she being demonized? But of course, that was the sort of advanced guard for, you know, these, like, this wave after wave after wave of attacks, but, you know, from the grassroots up, and then, of course, with people like Bolsonaro down against LGBTQ people, these attempts to, you know, sort of turn back the clock. So I say all this to say that I guess I'm wondering if there is, if you picked up any sense of a kind of conversation that's happening between the Brazilians and the Ironbound immigrants and the children of immigrants and some of the things that are happening in Brazil, because I think it's sort of fascinating that it isn't a one-way conversation, a one-way dialogue, but things are moving back and forth. And I'm wondering what's happening.
should we answer that and then take the second question? Or?
Mine is kind of slightly more of a comment. I feel uniquely interested in the subject of the conversation, being Brazilian and having growing up in the Ironbound myself, and just kind of being aware of what you're saying and being aware of what you're saying. And I guess my desire to re-emphasize how much what Victoria is saying is true of the influence religion and religious beliefs have in the lives of people and how they feel and express themselves in terms of queerness. And the further, to further like put the stamp of that to, what am I trying to say? Brazilian people in the Ironbound like staying in the Ironbound. And for the most part, they see themselves in what you described as the good ethnicity ideology, and they, like what you were talking about, Joilson, are afraid that too much bubble under the pot might like boil over and bring like negative pushback to them. And so I think that people come, and I guess what you said makes me think about how people come from Brazil to here to like try life again and like try to do better than they were doing. And so maybe sometimes even they're possibly even leaving these conversations behind to not think about them. So, but these are comments. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Is it okay?
Joyce doesn't want to start trouble, let's just put it that way.
Right.
But yet, I think that, again, there is this, Joyson is yet undocumented, right? So his fear of, oh shoot, like repercussions and him being reactive, right? That's a huge concern for him. But all of this time, I think that, he has been social. He has been what Ana Ramos Zayas might say, a street therapist. He has engaged a lot of folks. He has such great social skills to connect with everybody. He's not just in the margins, being this kind of, disciplined baker, No, he is out on the field talking to people, relating with straight people, with gay people. I mean, he's out there. But there's a fine line going on between, being this kind of good ethnic and then being reactive. I mean, he's HIV positive. Mm-hmm. He knows that other people are HIV positive, And I wish I could have talked more because a lot of the discussions and why I raise, for instance, why we need HIV education in the Ironbound is because that conversation is never discussed among them. There isn't a space in the Ironbound. There isn't yet. So, or discussion. I mean, we were talking about PrEP. None of the friends talk about PrEP. One of my informants was saying how one of his neighbors, he knows he's HIV positive, but they don't have this conversation, right? So part of that good ethnicity is also repressing those urgent needs, or not that these folks need to have. I mean, I remember hanging out with folks early, like in 2004, we never talked about HIV, we just never talked about those things. We were fooling around and having fun, but that conversation was not, protected sex. A lot of my friends or colleagues would go to saunas in the city, right? One of the 59-year-old was going daily to saunas and was afraid for years to take his HIV exam until finally he did it. And I had that conversation with him in this past, because I hadn't seen him in 10 years. I'm like, you finally took your HIV exam, yay! But anyway, all that to say that these guys are actors out on the street. They're good ethnics, but something is holding them back. And along with that too is this kind of disinterest or apathy, I don't know what we can call it, of not coming together to really discuss mutual shared interests that have needed to be discussed a long time ago. Because yes, a lot of these queers are there to stay too, right? And we also need to think about the Ironbound as this really limited space where everybody needs to share it. You know, that, where everybody's gonna be visible at this point. And I think that, and one of the other things that we're discussing, I'll end here, what we're seeing, what my informants have said are Brazilians that are coming now are coming to the States out. So that's part of the openness and visibility that we're also seeing. That like folks that were here early on in 1998, they were just building this culture, and they were very subtle and tacit about it. But now there's much more visibility, a lot of these older guys are seeing it. They're out. So we're seeing this emergence happening. But what is that part of a consumer culture, or is this going to be part of a communal building initiative?
That's a really good question. They are having a lot of conversations about Bolsonaro, most definitely. Even when I'm at Twisters all the time, they're talking about it all the time. I think that there is a very strong conservative population in the Ironbound, and you see Bolsonaro stickers, you literally don't even see that in New York. Bolsonaro stickers are a very unique thing to see in the Ironbound. It's like the equivalent of Trump hats, and I think it's 10 times worse because he's literally okay with killing black and brown people in the favelas because he sees them as criminals. Not that Trump or any other politician does the same thing, because they do the same things, but he's very blunt about it. And that's the thing about Brazil and Brazilians, I feel, we're very blunt people, very real. Well, they don't, they're not ashamed of their bigotry. It's kind of really messed up in that way. And the thing is, I see it in sometimes with very not often with other queer people, very small, group. But a lot of queer people are usually more progressive and clearly not support Bolsonaro. Like Marielle Franco, after she died, she was a bisexual activist, for example. And I think because, unfortunately, after Marielle Franco died, they're unfortunately very fortunate that there is a movement, unfortunate that she died, and it's crazy because she was assassinated. It's not she was sick, she was assassinated, and a lot of people are saying it's the government, in Brazil, that assassinated her. And she was elected, grassroots, legit grassroots, born and raised in the favela, and got into city council through the people, and died. So I've actually connected with the Brazilian Radical Group in New York. So a lot of those people are having those conversations. Unfortunately, I haven't been as active as I would like to with that group because they actually wanted because a lot of them mostly speak Portuguese and aren't good at translations. I wanted to offer my services. I'm kind of here a lot. I really want to keep my activism here. I feel like a lot of people just go to New York and are just kind of it's so progressive there, and it's a lot of the work isn't being done here. We need that. So that conversation is being made, but that's also a problem, right? Because a lot of Brazilians, they kind of go to New York because it's more progressive, and the same thing with even queer folks. A lot of them go to New York because it's more accepting. So a lot of the folks I feel that have this idea that's anti-Bolsonaro are not really here. They're here, but they're going to New York to express their views, and they're going to New York to express their ideologies instead of showing how they feel here. And I kind of want that here. It's just having problems finding those people. Right, and starting those very uncomfortable conversations. So
it sounds like you're already engaging in them across different.
I want to create that bridge. And actually, there was one guy who lived in Bahia, born and raised in Bahia. I connected with from the Brazilian group, and he lives in Newark. So it would be cool for the two to connect. And I think he's a professor. And he studies Afro-Brazilian culture of Brazil, brings his education here and does a lot of his work. But he does his work in New York, though. That's the only thing. So, you know what I mean? That would be an interesting connection to have. And then in terms of that ethnic, good ethnic group, I feel like a lot of Brazilians justify that through well, I feel like colonization has caused that, but I also feel like there's this idea of because Brazilians are mixed that they're better. Because we're mixed, we're pretty, or something like that, And then Brazilians are also super sexualized and fetishized. Literally, I'm just a regular ass white girl, and so I tell you I'm Brazilian, and then all of a sudden I'm exotic, and it's okay. You know what I mean? And it's kind of weird, but sorry. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
I didn't have a
oh, you had a comment. That's right. I had a comment for the
I
comment.
that you put it out there.
Yes.
Just let us. We went with it. But I also wanted to add to what you're saying, what you're getting at too quickly is, this, how do we maintain some of the transnationally, or if you will diasporically, some of the things that are happening in Brazil here in the context of the Ironbound. The only thing I'll tell you too is I really do think that there's always a push in like to assimilate, right? There's a push to kind of assume consumer culture. I mean, that's what I see too, like progress, you know, that narrative of progress where, you know, you mobilize, you buy your car, you buy the clothes, like you just become more American. And you know, you listen to American music over Brazilian music. I mean, I love MPB, some of my friends weren't listening to that. Although you do hear some of the musics in the bar, so I'm maybe contradicting myself, but what I find generally is a preference to move away from like Brazilian identity culture. And I think that, you know, basically some of this ideology that you're mentioning about Bahia and stuff is so important, but what I find that it gets lost in that process to assimilate, you know? And then so part of that activism, I think, is also to recognize your roots, to maintain those roots, because, you know, the immigrant narrative is to assimilate, right? Like that's what we keep being told, right? In U.S. society, you know, you're holding back if you're not assimilating enough. You know, although, you know, I think more and more, you know, people are, you know, maintaining their cultures, their bicultural identities, but then at the same time too, there's some folks that choose to just try to assimilate. You know, a lot of Brazilians come here wanting to speak English, wanting to reduce their accents, you know? And yeah, so anyway.
Sorry, I was actually going to comment that I've actually experienced my parents trying to enforce that assimilation onto me. Literally, my Portuguese is like kind of half-assed because of the fact that like they didn't correct my Portuguese and they thought it was cute that I had an accent. And then like other Brazilians think it's really cute and like totally lied to me that I spoke really good Portuguese, and I found out when I'm 24 that I don't really. Just because one of my partners decided to tell me like como está falando, like how, like you speak weird, and I'm like, really? I mean, I'm also from Newark, so then it's like all this like Portuguese, Spanish, and like Brazilian accents comes together and like things happen, whatever. But and another thing I was going to mention is that there's also assimilation I feel like occurs in Brazil, and just from understanding my own ancestry, like I have ancestry actually from Syria, so I know it's like really mixed. This is actually a legit Middle Eastern population, Japanese population, and there's actually a certain section of my family that's part Japanese, like Brazilian, but those people will also assimilate to being Brazilian. So like my grandfather on my mom's side changed his name coming to Brazil and pretended to be Lebanese because Lebanese were considered to be more white and more acceptable. And in that way, like that was assimilation. And then they come here and it's like even further, and then it's like, I want to be American now, you know what I mean? So I guess I just wanted to add that like multifaceted idea of assimilation.
You know what, actually, I will use my moderator privilege and ask the two of you a question, because let me see if I can formulate this effectively. And this is kind of inspired by the comments that you guys were making too. You know, one of the things I think that we've seen in the Queer Newark Oral History Project is that one of the really exciting and unique and interesting thing about Newark's queer history is that it doesn't follow the model set by a lot of other cities. If you look at Chicago, LA, New York, you know, they're very multiracial, multi-class cities, but LGBT history tends to be dominated by these white middle-class activist organizations, right? And in Newark, that's not the case. You know, it's a black majority city for a full half century and going. And you know, queerness looks different, right? It's working class. It's not based on professional organizational models. It's often led by working class black lesbians. You know, it's very unique. And so looking at the Ironbound, which is, you know, not black majority, but in Newark, and it's certainly not a melting pot, but it's diverse, you know, you both offered such compelling critiques, right, of the kind of neoliberal, heteronormative aspects of queerness in the Ironbound. But I want to ask both of you about your idea of a positive vision of queerness that would be unique to the Ironbound. I mean, are there conditions there that might facilitate, you know, a sort of a different or new or exciting or radical kind of queerness, or are you not hopeful about that? Is that foreclosed by gentrification and assimilationist impulses and things like that? Yeah, sorry, not to throw an overly convoluted and heavy question at you. But I'm just curious what your positive vision of a queer politics in the Ironbound and what it might look like.
Newark is not fully gentrified yet. We're not there yet.
Mhm.
So there's time. There's still time, and we can still prevent this from becoming like exactly like New York. And as much as New York likes to act like they're the center of the world, y'all are still gentrified, and your politics is still like accommodating really classist bullshit. Okay, so like I don't know. I feel like it's almost like a trend, like over there. Like you know what I mean? It's like not like it shouldn't be cute to be political, you know, because then you're not changing anything. You're supposed to be disruptive. So I would just like to, I'll probably touch up on that some more later, but I just want to state that.
Still thinking through. Look, I think about Joelson. I think about Joelson. Joelson's gonna stay in the Ironbound. Hopefully, his place will stay. There will be gentrification. He's gonna need to save some. He's gonna need to have some life savings, right? He's gonna need maybe to tell his employer, listen, guy, I've worked with you for how many years? 20 years. I need a raise, or I need you to give me some more incentives to stay with you. I mean, I think the more we push for conversations, because that's the thing, right? Queer futurity, right? Right? We don't survive, right? We're supposed to die by when? By the time we're what? Right? But no, but you know what? Some of these guys are gonna live on to their 60s, 70s, and they're gonna get old, right? So what's in it for them? Where are they gonna go to? I just think about the conversation that needs to happen as we're here to stay. We're also part of this community. That's where I think that this radical queerness comes in, because it's the kind of conversation around needs. I have needs too. I belong here. I've worked here. I have needs. So that's.
I want to see more queer people be political in general in the Ironbound. I feel like the starting point needs to be like finding, like I thought about like just finding that group of folks that don't support Bolsonaro in the Ironbound, and do that work in the Ironbound, not just somewhere else. And I think it's hopeful. I think it's very hopeful. I like to see like queer folks, all people of all walks of life, just come together and protest in the Ironbound against all this gentrification BS.
I also think that, having a conversation, that same conversation, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you didn't.
Having the same conversation with the two guys on the street where everybody was saying hello to them, I was like, we're not gonna get to the place because everybody's coming up and talking to you, But along that way, when one of them was sending money, remittances to Brazil, we left the remittance store and we kept walking. One of them started to tell me about, a student who wasn't getting support in the schools, and also mentioned how he thinks that there is a high suicide rate in Newark. I think that what might be compelling to some of these folks is being mentors, right? Kind of passing on what it means to be queer, being mentors, giving them that possibility to help youth move forward, forge their queerness. So that's another radical queerness that might be important, and also thinking about family in a very anti-neoliberal way is to be a mentor, be a figure, be a father figure, be a maternal figure for a queer child.
I largely agree on that point that you just named. But other than that, you keep saying the name, I can't pronounce it, it starts with a B.
Bolsonaro.
Yes, okay, I can't pronounce it, so I wasn't even gonna try. But you keep saying, from listening to what you said some pretty, in my opinion, bad things that he's in support of and that he's pushing. So my question is, do you think that people in the Ironbound, do you think that they're in support of him due to the lack of education? Or do you think that it is just because it's like a traditional belief that's passed on in terms of the household? And if so, how do you go into this environment? Like, how do you go into the Ironbound and start to change the belief, change the system of the belief, and how do you educate these people?
I think people look at America and they see what's working, and they think it's working, and they just want to copy it. And you're right, like Brazilians love Americans. They almost like fetishize them. It's like, right? So I think like I'm not saying Bolsonaro, because Bolsonaro's been involved in politics even before he got elected. So I feel like, I'm just getting a little off topic. I feel like kind of centering him as the root of corruption is almost inaccurate, because it's like he is the problem as in terms of like why the Amazon's burning and all of this BS. But the Amazon's been burning at the same time, and then also like the evangelical church has been very, very entrenched in the politics of Brazil for a very long time, and in the culture. But outside of that, what's the question? The question? How you can reach, so actually I've had some decent conversations with people who were Bolsonaro supporters, and the way in which I've been able to reach out and impact them was kind of explain to them what works here that isn't like him. Social services. So like them being like, well, why is there so much crime? Blah blah blah. Like this is the only solution. Like you're gonna have to kill people in order to like get rid of crime. And it's like the argument that's like, well, the reason why there's less crime in the United States is because people have access to social services. At least, even if they're really bad, at least more than Brazil. Like Brazil, you really don't get much at all. The favelas are literally neglected by the government. Like. But when I said that, it was just one Uber driver who was Brazilian that I talked to, and he was actually like not white Brazilian. So it's like interesting how that works. Like Brazilians from all walks of life and all complexions will like have this idea. It's not just like one particular. Not that it's not white dominated, right? But it's just weird how that happens. But and then he actually was quiet for a minute and had to think for a minute because I said that. I think the only time I have problems with it is when I'm debating with my mom and my dad about Bolsonaro and why he's toxic. I have an easier time doing that with people on the street than I do with my family, like because it's personal. And it's just like, I guess it's like a little different with family because like the idea of like I'm your mother and father, I know better than you is like kind of in their brain versus like someone on the street, it's an easier time to just have a conversation. So I think it's just like, unfortunately, I don't want to make it that way, right? Because I feel like the idealization of America is also negative to Brazil. Because like it's actually, and I've done research on the prison system as well. They've been trying to mimic our prison system. And their prison population has also been increasing in Brazil. And it is also dominated, like it's also black and brown dominated. And they think that's a good thing, And it's in their policy. It's in their politics. So being like, well, this is what America's doing right. And this is why we should do it too, is kind of like bad in a way, right? I kind of feel bad saying it that way, but I feel like in some way it works when you phrase it the way I mentioned earlier.
No, we can go on to the next question.
I will say, I'll just throw this in because I live in the Ironbound too, and as an historian, I was a little taken aback, to be honest, when we moved into the Ironbound and it's heavily Portuguese, and I'm like, all right, like socialist revolution in the 70s, right? And it's like, oh wait, no, the Portuguese population actually overwhelmingly remembers fondly Salazar and fascism, and it's like, oh, that's the cultural memory. And so yeah, I mean, the Ironbound is very complicated, right? And it's kind of cultural politics of memory for different immigrant populations. Not that North Newark isn't the same as well, I suppose. But yeah, I've been surprised by the Bolsonaro stickers everywhere, every day. And at first I thought it was something people might try to hide, but no, like big car details. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a minute. We probably got time for one more question, if anybody wanted to throw anything out.
I might just want to argue.
Yeah.
I might just want to argue a little bit and say, I wonder if focusing on what's happening locally and kind of not focusing too much on, say, Bolsonaro. Like I really understand, how it's important to make those connections, but will the conversation get lost if we focus too much on what people think about Bolsonaro? Because I think that there's something locally that happens in our everyday lives, right? Like we're connected with Brazil, but our lives are really here in Ironbound Newark, right? And I feel like if you're gonna bring up the Bolsonaro, it's gonna get so argumentative that you're not gonna get anywhere, So I'm just wondering if those are things that to avoid. I mean, I think as a Colombian American in the last presidential elections, it was help me. It was the two presidential elections. I mean, you know, you had your socialist, who was who was considered communist, and then you had Duque, who was your Trump. So we're seeing this model recurring in several Latin American countries, right? In some ways, there's this interesting there's this interesting meta-narrative happening in politics in Latin America, right? If you pick the socialist, you're communist, and you're outlaw, right? Yeah, so I'm just wondering, you know, to be wary about, you know, homeland politics like being the centerpiece of things that need to happen locally, right? I mean, this is a community in and of itself, right? We do have attachments to, you know, Brazil, to Colombia, to different countries, but this is a culture, a locality that needs to be treated in its own light, right? People's identities change because they live here and they connect with people here, so.
I wanted to say something about bridging the cultural divide that I do feel slightly exists. I've lived in Newark for a long time, and I used to live in the Ironbound with my ex-partner, and now I live in another part of Newark, but my gym is in the Ironbound. I go through there often, like sometimes to shop, sometimes to eat, like lots of other residents. And I have had a few Brazilian friends down there, and being active with the Newark LGBT Center and other organizations around here, I tried occasionally years ago to invite some of my Brazilian friends in that area. And I understand that with one of them in particular, there was a slight language barrier because they were still working on their English, and of course I never wanted to put him in situations where he'd be uncomfortable about not being able to follow dialogue very well. But I would always try to make sure that somebody else who spoke Portuguese and English fluently would be there, so everyone would have a chance to befriend and connect.
Where were you inviting them to?
Just to things at the LGBT Center, you know, to gay pride events, because, you know, like I started being involved with things with Newark Gay Pride back in like 2010, 2011, and just wanting them to be a part of the bigger Newark narrative.
Sure.
And at times it was successful, and they would come out, and then after a while it would devolve. And I also know that there are African American queer people who, ever since Twister has opened, and once they felt like there are different organizations like HIV prevention networks and LGBT supportive agencies in the area that did, you know, sponsor events at Twister before Newark Pride, and maybe even some still do things, or I haven't been there lately, but maybe even lately they still do sponsor certain events or invite people to things. And once that bridge had been lowered, and they felt like there was a reason for African American and Hispanic people to go down Ferry Street and actually do something in the Ironbound and say, oh yeah, we'd love to be a part of the queer scene down there, we'll go to Twister, we'll support. And they turn up in numbers, as my friend here and other friends of mine did, and we had a good time. But I do feel like, in terms of the divide, to make it, I'm a Game of Thrones fan, so I'm gonna kind of express it within the geography of Game